What would you sacrifice for a love that could end 2 civilizations? Elindra was born into Elven nobility, destined for a life of purity and privilege, until the night a dying orc warrior collapsed at her clinic door. She had seconds to decide. Let him die and preserve everything she'd been taught to believe, or save him using magic so forbidden that speaking its name meant execution. She chose to save him. And in that single moment of compassion, she shattered 700 years of carefully constructed lies, broke laws that had stood since the Sundering Wars, and set in motion events that would force both elves and orcs to confront a truth they'd murdered thousands to keep hidden. Because the bond she created didn't just tie 2 lives together. It made possible something that every scholar, every healer, every leader of both races swore could never exist. And when they discover what she's carrying inside her, when they realize what this impossible life could mean for the future, neither army will stop until one of them is destroyed. The question isn't whether she'll survive, it's whether anyone will. Finalize come. The sanctum's holding cells were carved from pure white starstone, a material that suppressed magic so completely that Elindra felt like she was drowning in silence. They'd separated her from Gormath immediately upon arrival, dragging him down to the lower dungeons while she was escorted to what the guards called the dignified chambers. A prettier cage, but still a cage. The room held a bed with silk sheets, a small table with untouched food, and a window that looked out over the city she'd grown up in. From here, she could see the spires of the council hall where her father had spent 30 years shaping Elven policy. Could see the gardens where her mother had taught her to identify healing herbs before the fever took her when Elindra was only 9. Could see the market square where, right now, town criers were probably announcing her crime to anyone who would listen. The daughter of High Counselor Theron Brightmantle has committed treason against her people, bound herself to an orc through forbidden magic. The trial will commence at sunset. All citizens are invited to witness justice. She'd been here for 6 hours. 6 hours of silence broken only by the guards changing shifts outside her door, and the steady, drumming presence of 3 heartbeats echoing through her consciousness. Hers. Gormath's somewhere deep below her. And the impossible third. That tiny flutter of life that grew stronger with each passing moment. Elindra pressed a hand to her stomach, still flat, still showing no outward signs of the miracle growing inside her. Miracle. That's what part of her wanted to call it. The other part, the part trained in anatomical precision and medical impossibility, kept screaming that this shouldn't exist. Elves and orcs couldn't reproduce together. It was biological fact, proven by centuries of research. Their magical essences were too fundamentally different, their life forces incompatible at the most basic level. Even the rare unions between elves and humans produced children only 1 time in 100 attempts. But orcs? Never. Not once in recorded history. So how? The question had been circling her mind like a predator since the moment she'd felt that third heartbeat. Was it the litany itself? Had binding their souls so completely somehow overridden the biological barriers that should have kept this from happening? Or was it something else? Something deeper and more terrifying? What if the impossibility of this child was exactly the point? The sound of a lock turning made her turn from the window. She expected a guard bringing more untouched food, or perhaps Serendor coming to interrogate her again. Instead, her father stepped through the doorway. Lord Theron Brightmantle looked like he'd aged 20 years in the past 6 hours. His silver hair, usually immaculately styled, hung loose around his shoulders. His robes, bearing the 7-starred emblem of his office, were wrinkled. But it was his eyes that stopped Elindra's breath in her chest. She'd never seen her father cry. Not when her mother died. Not when his brother was killed in the border wars. Not ever. He was crying now. "Elindra," he said, and his voice broke around her name like glass shattering. "My little star, what have you done?" She wanted to run to him, to collapse into his arms the way she had as a child, when the world felt too big and frightening. but her feet wouldn't move, because beneath the grief in his expression, she saw something else, something that looked like calculation, like a man trying to solve an equation that had too many variables. "I saved a life," she said quietly. "That's what healers do, Father. You taught me that. Don't." The word came out sharp, almost angry. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing her shoulders with a grip that was just shy of painful. "Don't you dare try to make this about healing. You didn't just save him, Elindra. You bound yourself to him, to an orc. Do you understand what that means? Do you have any concept of what you've thrown away?" "Everything," she thought. "My position, my future, my life." Out loud, she said, "I understand that I couldn't let him die." Theron released her shoulders and turned away, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more controlled. The voice he used in council sessions when he was maneuvering around opponents. "The litany of tethered souls is forbidden for a reason. It doesn't just bind lives, Elindra. It binds essences, magic. Everything that makes you Elven, everything that makes him orcish, they're tangled together now in ways that can't be undone. You're contaminated." The word hit her like a slap. Contaminated? Magically speaking, yes. He still wasn't looking at her. "Your bloodline was pure. 7 generations of carefully maintained genetic and magical purity, designed to preserve the strongest aspects of our race. And you've corrupted it by tying yourself to a creature whose entire existence is built on sealed rage and artificial violence." She felt Gormath's response to that through their bond, a spike of pain so sharp it made her gasp. He could hear this somehow, she realized. Maybe not the words themselves, but the emotions behind them. The disgust, the rejection. "He's not a creature," Elindra said, her voice hardening. "He's a person who saved children from his own war party, who took a spear through the chest rather than hurt innocents. When was the last time you did something that selfless, Father?" Theron whirled on her, and for a moment, she saw real anger flash across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by that careful political mask. "You don't understand what's at stake here. The council has been debating for hours about what to do with you. Half of them want you executed immediately. The other half want to use you as an example, parade you through every elven settlement as a warning about the dangers of fraternizing with other races." He paused, his jaw working. "I've been fighting them, trying to find a way to save you, and I think I have one." Hope flared in her chest before she could stop it. "What kind of way?" "There's a ritual," Theron said slowly, watching her face carefully. "Very old magic, from before the Sundering Wars. It can sever a tethered soul bond, but it requires both participants to consent. If you and the orc agree to the severance, the council will show mercy. They'll exile you instead of executing you. You'll lose your position, your titles, your place in society. But you'll live. You can start over somewhere far from here, maybe in the human territories. They're more accepting of half-breeds and outcasts." The words should have sounded like salvation. Instead, they sounded like a trap. "And Gormath?" she asked. "What happens to him after the bond is severed?" Her father's expression went carefully blank. "That's not your concern anymore," which meant death. They'd kill him the moment the bond was broken, and she couldn't die with him. Elindra shook her head, backing away. "No, I won't do it." "Elindra, be reasonable." "I said no." The shout surprised both of them. She'd never raised her voice to her father before, never directly defied him. "You want me to agree to his execution, to save myself by condemning him. I won't do it." Theron's face hardened. "Then you're condemning yourself. Both of you will die at sunset. Is that what you want?" "Yes." A wild part of her thought. If the choice is between living without him and dying together, then yes. But then she felt it again. That third heartbeat. That impossible, precious life that hadn't asked to be created, hadn't asked to be the product of forbidden magic and biological impossibility. A child who deserved the chance to live, regardless of what happened to its parents. Her hand went to her stomach, an unconscious gesture. But her father's eyes were too sharp. He saw the movement, saw the way her expression changed, and she watched understanding dawn across his face like a sun rising over a battlefield. "No," he breathed. "Tell me you're not. I'm pregnant." The words fell between them like stones into deep water. "It's impossible, I know, but it's real. I can feel the heartbeat, Father. A third life, connected to ours through the bond." She took a step toward him, desperate now. "Don't you see? This changes everything. This proves that elves and orcs aren't as different as the council claims. If we can create life together, then maybe... abomination." The word was barely a whisper, but it cut deeper than any blade. Theron was staring at her stomach like it held a monster instead of a child. "You're carrying an orc's spawn. In your body. In your blood." His face had gone pale, almost gray. "This is worse than I thought. So much worse. Father, please. The council can never know about this." He was speaking more to himself now, his mind clearly racing through scenarios and solutions. "If they find out, they won't just execute you. They'll dissect you. They'll want to study how this happened, want to understand the mechanism. You'll die slowly, painfully, and that thing inside you will die with you." He grabbed her arms again, harder this time. "Listen to me very carefully. You will agree to the severance ritual. You will do it today, before the trial. And afterward, you will take the herbs I give you. Bloodroot and silver sage. They'll end the pregnancy within hours. No one else needs to know it ever existed." Elindra felt something inside her crack. "You want me to kill my child. It's not a child, it's a mistake. A biological anomaly that should never have been allowed to form." He was pleading now, and that somehow made it worse. "I'm trying to save you, Elindra. Don't you see that? If you do this, if you cooperate, I can get the council to agree to exile instead of execution. You can live. You can have a real life, maybe even find a proper elven partner someday and have legitimate children. Get out." Her voice was ice. "What? Get out." She pulled away from him, and through the bond, she felt Gormath's rage mixing with her own, felt him throwing himself against his cell door stories below. "You're not my father. My father taught me that all life is sacred, that healing means protecting those who can't protect themselves. The man standing in front of me right now is a coward and a murderer." Theron's face went red. "I am trying to save your life." "No, you're not. You're trying to save your reputation, your precious political position. Well, I don't care anymore. Do you hear me? I don't care about the council or the law or what anyone thinks. I'm not going to murder my child to make your life easier." She stood straighter, feeling the truth of her words settle into her bones like iron. "So go ahead. Tell the council about the pregnancy. Let them dissect me if that's what they want. At least I'll die knowing I chose love over fear." For a long moment, her father just stared at her. Then he turned and walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. When he spoke, his voice was empty of all emotion. "The trial begins in 3 hours. I suggest you use that time to make peace with whatever gods you still believe in." The door closed behind him with a soft click. And Elindra collapsed onto the bed, her whole body shaking, as Gormath's anguish crashed through their bond like a tidal wave. Far below, in his cell, she felt him screaming her name. The trial chamber was older than the city itself, carved from a single massive piece of starstone that legend said had fallen from the sky during the first age of the world. 7 thrones ringed the circular room, each occupied by a council member whose face remained hidden behind masks of polished silver. Elindra had been in this room only once before, when she was 12 and her father had brought her to witness a border dispute resolution. She'd thought the masks were beautiful then, mysterious and wise. Now they just looked cold, inhuman. She stood in the center of the chamber with her hands still bound in suppression silk, feeling the weight of 1,000 invisible eyes on her. The gallery above was packed with observers, Elven citizens who'd come to witness the fall of the High Counselor's daughter. She could hear their whispers like a swarm of insects, feel their disgust and fascination rolling off them in waves. But none of it mattered as much as the figure being dragged through the opposite entrance. Gormath looked like he'd been through a war. His left eye was swollen shut, a fresh cut bleeding down his cheek. His wrists were raw and bleeding where the enchanted chains had burned into his skin. But he was walking upright, refusing to be carried or dragged despite the fact that she could feel his pain screaming through their bond. When their eyes met across the chamber, something in her chest loosened just enough to let her breathe. He was alive. They were both still alive. And the third heartbeat between them continued its steady, defiant rhythm. "Let the emergency council of judgment commence," a voice rang out from the central throne. Council Elder Astria, the oldest living elf in the city at 347 years old. Her voice sounded like wind through ancient trees, beautiful and merciless. "We gather to pass judgment on 2 souls who have violated the most sacred laws of our people. Elindra Brightmantle, daughter of High Counselor Theron Brightmantle, you stand accused of performing forbidden magic, binding your life essence to an enemy combatant of Orcish descent, and harboring a known insurgent who has killed 17 of our soldiers. How do you answer these charges?" Elindra lifted her chin. "Gormath wasn't an insurgent when he came to me. He was dying. I took the healer's oath 16 years ago, and that oath requires me to preserve life regardless of politics or prejudice. I would do the same again." A murmur rippled through the gallery. One of the council members, whose mask bore the symbol of the war ministry, leaned forward. "You admit, then, to knowingly harboring an enemy of our people. I admit to healing someone who needed healing. If that makes me guilty, then every healer in this city should stand trial for the same crime." "You speak of the healer's oath," Astria said, her tone never changing. "But that oath does not permit the use of forbidden magic. The Litany of Tethered Souls was outlawed 700 years ago after it was used to create abominations during the Sundering Wars. You knew this. Your grandmother was executed for teaching that very ritual to unsanctioned healers. Yet you performed it anyway. Why?" The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Elindra felt Gormath tense through their bond, felt him willing her to lie, to say it was an accident, that she didn't know what she was doing. But she was done with lies. Because he was dying, and nothing else would save him. Because in the 3 minutes I spent looking into his eyes before he lost consciousness, I saw more compassion and honor than I've seen in most elves I've known my entire life. Because the law is wrong. The gallery erupted. Shouts of outrage mixed with a few scattered gasps of shock. The council members remained still as statues, but Elindra could feel the tension crackling through the room like lightning about to strike. "Silence," Astria commanded, and the room obeyed instantly. "You claim the law is wrong. On what basis?" "On the basis that it's built on lies." Elindra's voice was steady now, strengthened by the certainty flowing through her bond with Gormath. "We're taught that orcs are inherently violent, that their nature is fundamentally corrupted. But that's not true. They're made violent, forced through a ritual called the Rite of Sealed Fury when they're 15 years old. A ritual that burns away their natural compassion and replaces it with manufactured rage. Gormath escaped that ritual. He kept his soul intact. And for that crime, his own people want him dead just as much as ours do." She took a step forward, ignoring the way the guards tensed. "So tell me, Council Elder, who's really the enemy here? The orc who chose mercy over violence, or the systems that punish anyone who dares to choose differently?" The silence that followed was absolute. Then Astria turned her masked face toward Gormath. "Is this true, orc?" Did you desert your people's sacred rites? Gormath's voice came out rough, damaged from whatever they'd done to him in the dungeons. Yes. The rite of sealed fury is a leash, a way to control us, to make us into weapons that can't question orders. I saw what it did to my brothers, watched them lose pieces of themselves they could never get back. So I ran, and I've been running ever since. Yet you killed 17 of our soldiers. The war minister interjected. How do you explain that if you're so opposed to violence? I killed them because they were slaughtering human refugees who were trying to cross into neutral territory. Children, elders, people who had no weapons and no way to defend themselves. I asked the soldiers to stop, begged them. They laughed and kept killing. Gormath's chains rattled as his hands clenched into fists. So yes, I killed them, and I'd do it again. Because sometimes the only way to stop monsters is to become one yourself. The war minister rose from his throne. You admit to murder, then. Your guilt is... He admits to defending innocent lives, Elindra interrupted. Which is more than I can say for our soldiers who thought slaughtering refugees was acceptable behavior. Enough. Astria's voice cut through the brewing argument like a knife. This council has heard sufficient testimony. We will now deliberate on... Wait. The voice came from the gallery. Every head turned to see a figure making their way down from the upper levels. An orc. But not just any orc. This one was ancient. Her gray-green skin covered in so many ritual scars, they formed patterns like maps across her arms and face. She wore the ceremonial armor of an orcish lore keeper, one of the few positions in orc society that transcended clan politics. Elindra had never seen one in person before. The council guards moved to intercept her, but Astria raised a hand. Let her approach. Lorekeeper Chakra has diplomatic immunity under the Treaty of Ash and Bone. Speak, Lorekeeper. Though I warn you, interference in council proceedings is permitted when the proceedings concern one of our own. Chakra interrupted, her accent thick but her words precise. Gormath may be renegade, but he is still orc. And under our law, I have the right to speak in his defense. She stopped at the edge of the judgment circle, her eyes moving between Elindra and Gormath. When she saw their bound hands, their proximity, something shifted in her expression. Recognition. Fear. You performed the tethering, she said quietly, addressing Elindra directly. The soul binding that your people call forbidden. How long ago? 2 days, Elindra answered, confused by the fear in the old orc's voice. Why does... 2 days? Chakra closed her eyes. Then it has already begun. Tell me, child, do you feel a third presence in your bond? A small one, growing stronger? The chamber went deathly silent. Elindra felt Gormath's shock mirror her own. They hadn't told anyone about the pregnancy, not even the guards who'd searched her. How could this stranger possibly know? I don't understand, Elindra said. You do, Chakra replied, opening her eyes. They were sad and ancient and full of terrible knowledge. Because you can feel it. The child that shouldn't exist. The life that breaks every law of nature our peoples have established. She turned to face the council. 700 years ago, during the Sundering Wars, there were others like these two. Elves and orcs who bound their souls through the tethering ritual. And some of them, a very few, managed to conceive children. Do you know what happened to those children? Astria leaned forward. The historical records say they were all stillborn. Biological incompatibility. The historical records lie. Chakra's voice rang through the chamber like a bell. The children lived. More than that, they thrived. They were born with abilities that terrified both our peoples. They could sense emotions across vast distances, heal wounds that should have been fatal, and most dangerous of all, they could see through the magic that controls us. The rite of sealed fury that binds my people. The purity laws that bind yours. These children could break both with a touch. She gestured to Elindra and Gormath. That's why the tethering was forbidden. Not because it's an abomination, but because the powers that rule our races couldn't allow children like that to exist. Couldn't allow proof that we're not as different as they claim. So they hunted down every tethered pair they could find, killed them before the children could be born. And then they rewrote history to say such children were impossible. The implications crashed through the chamber like a physical wave. Elindra felt her knees go weak, felt Gormath's confusion and growing horror through their bond. "You're saying," the War Minister said slowly, "that this pregnancy is real, and that the child will have power to undermine the very foundations of our society." "I'm saying," Chakra replied, "that this child is the reason both our peoples will go to war, because neither side can allow it to be born. The elves will fight to kill it, to preserve their purity laws. The orcs will fight to capture it, to study how it breaks the rite of sealed fury. And in the middle of that war, these two young fools will die, along with everyone else foolish enough to stand beside them." She looked at Elindra with something that might have been pity. "I came here to warn you, to tell you that running won't save you, hiding won't save you. The only thing that might give you a chance is if you can reach the neutral sanctum before both armies arrive. It's 3 days' travel north, through territory controlled by neither elves nor orcs. If you can get there, if you can claim sanctuary, you might live long enough to what?" Gormath demanded. "To have this child that everyone wants dead? To raise it in hiding while our peoples tear each other apart?" "To survive," Chakra said simply. "Which is more than you'll do if you stay here." Astria rose from her throne, and Elindra saw her father standing in the shadows behind the council seats. His face was ashen, his hands trembling. He'd known. Somehow he'd known what the pregnancy meant, and he'd tried to make her end it to protect her, or to protect himself. "This council has reached its decision," Astria announced. "Elindra Brightmantle and Gormath the Renegade, you are both sentenced to death by purification fire at dawn tomorrow. May the flames cleanse the corruption you have brought into this world." Gormath roared, lunging against his chains. Elindra felt his rage and desperation tear through their bond, felt the baby's heartbeat stutter in response to their combined fear. And then the chamber doors exploded inward, and everything descended into chaos. The explosion tore through the ancient starstone doors like they were made of paper, sending chunks of white rock and twisted metal screaming across the trial chamber. Elindra threw herself to the ground on instinct, her bound hands making it impossible to catch herself properly. She hit the floor hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs, felt Gormath's panic slam through their bond as he watched her fall from across the room. Then the screaming started. Through the smoke and dust, figures poured into the chamber. Not elves, not orcs. Humans, dozens of them, wearing mismatched armor and carrying weapons that ranged from farmers' scythes to stolen elven blades. At their head was a woman Elindra recognized from the border clinics, a human refugee named Mara, whose 3 children she'd treated for fever 2 months ago. Mara's face was twisted with something between desperation and determination as she raised a crude crossbow toward the council thrones. "Nobody move," Mara shouted, her voice cracking with strain. "We're not here to hurt anyone. We just want them." She pointed at Elindra and Gormath. "The healer and the orc. Let them go, and we'll leave peacefully." Astria's laugh was like ice cracking. "You dare threaten the Eternal Council with farming tools and stolen weapons? You're humans, barely more than children playing at war. Surrender now, and we might show mercy." "We don't want your mercy," another human called out, a young man barely out of his teens. "We want justice. That healer saved my sister's life last winter when your fancy council physician said she wasn't worth the medicine. And that orc pulled my father out of a burning building during the Ashwood raid. So yeah, we're here for them. And you're going to let them go." The council guards were already moving, forming a protective barrier around the thrones. Elindra saw her father standing frozen behind Astria's seat, his face a mask of horror as he watched his carefully ordered world collapse into chaos. Sarandor appeared from a side entrance, sword drawn, his silver eyes calculating distances and angles. He could cut down half the humans before they even registered the threat, Elindra realized. And he would do it without hesitation, because that's what he'd been trained for, protecting the council at any cost. "Don't," Elindra heard herself say, struggling to her knees. "Please, Sarandor, don't hurt them. They're just trying to help. They're insurgents who just committed an act of war against the Eternal Council," Sarandor replied, his voice flat and professional. But his eyes kept darting to her, and through the bond she shared with Gormath, she could feel echoes of Sarandor's emotions. Betrayal, grief, and underneath it all, a stubborn thread of something that might have been love, twisted now into bitter resentment. "Stand down, humans. This is your only warning." Mara's crossbow didn't waver. "We're not leaving without them." Time seemed to slow. Elindra saw Sarandor's muscles tense, saw the moment he decided that protecting the council mattered more than avoiding bloodshed, saw his blade begin to move in that devastatingly fast arc that would separate Mara's head from her shoulders before she could even pull the trigger. And then Gormath was there. Somehow, impossibly, he'd broken his chains. The enchanted metal hung from his wrists in twisted fragments, blood streaming from where the magic-infused steel had burned through skin and muscle. He crashed into Sarandor like a falling mountain, driving the elf captain into the ground with enough force to crack the starstone floor. "Run!" Gormath roared at the humans, at Elindra, at anyone who would listen. "Get her out of here. Now!" Elindra felt his pain through their bond, a white-hot agony from broken ribs and torn muscles and burns that should have left him unconscious. But he was still moving, still fighting, because she needed him to, because their child needed him to. Mara grabbed Elindra's arm, hauling her to her feet. "Come on, we've got maybe 30 seconds before those guards remember they outnumber us 10-1. "I can't leave him," Elindra gasped, trying to pull away. But Mara's grip was iron. "He's buying us time. Don't waste it." 2 other humans flanked them, forming a protective barrier as they pushed toward the shattered entrance. Behind them, the trial chamber erupted into violence. Elindra felt every blow Gormath took, every cut that opened across his skin. Felt Sarandor's blade slice across his shoulder. Felt the council guard's magic burning into his flesh. He was fighting 6 opponents at once and losing, but he was still standing, still keeping them focused on him instead of the escaping humans. Gormath. His name tore from her throat like a prayer. Through their bond, she felt his response. Not words, but emotions. Love. Determination. And underneath it all, a terrible certainty that he wasn't going to survive this. No. She pushed back through their connection, sent every ounce of stubborn refusal she possessed. "You don't get to die. We need you. I need you." She felt his surprise, then something that might have been a laugh. "Always so stubborn, little star. That's what my father calls me," she thought wildly, even as Mara dragged her through corridors she'd walked 1,000 times before. Called me his little star. Past tense now, probably. Past tense for everything. They burst out of the sanctum into late afternoon sunlight that felt obscenely normal after the chaos inside. The human refugees had horses waiting, stolen or borrowed or bought. Elindra didn't know and didn't care. Mara practically threw her onto one, then swung up behind her. "Hold on tight. The North Road is 3 miles, and every guard in the city is going to be chasing us within minutes. We can't leave without Gormath," Elindra insisted, trying to slide back down. But Mara's arms locked around her waist. "Your orc friend made his choice. Honor it by staying alive." The horses bolted forward, and Elindra felt her heart tearing in 2 directions. Forward, toward safety and survival, and the tiny life growing inside her. Backward, toward the man whose heartbeat had become as necessary as her own. They were halfway to the city gates when she felt it. A spike of agony so intense it drove the air from her lungs and nearly knocked her from the saddle. Gormath. Something had happened to Gormath. Through their bond, she felt his life force flickering like a candle in a windstorm, felt Serendor's blade buried in his chest, precisely placed to cause maximum damage without immediately killing, felt her father standing over him, and the words that cut deeper than any weapon. Kill him slowly, make him suffer, and when he's finally dead, bring me the body. I want to make sure that abomination my daughter is carrying dies with him. The world went red around the edges. Elindra heard herself screaming, felt her magic surging against the suppression silk with enough force to make the enchanted fabric smoke and char. The horse beneath her stumbled, confused by the sudden burst of power. And then something inside her broke. Not physically, but something deeper. Something that had been holding her magic in check her entire life. The careful control her teachers had instilled, the rigid discipline her father had demanded, the endless lessons in restraint and propriety, and never ever reaching for more power than was absolutely necessary. All of it shattered like glass. The suppression silk burned away completely, falling from her wrists in ashes. And Elindra reached through her bond with Gormath, reached with every scrap of healing magic she possessed, and poured her life force into him. She felt his heart stutter back to life, felt his wounds begin to close, not fully, but enough to pull him back from the edge, felt his shock and confusion and desperate gratitude crashing through their connection. Stay alive, she commanded, no longer asking but demanding. Stay alive until I can get back to you, because I'm not running anymore. The revelation hit her like lightning. She'd been thinking about this all wrong. Survival didn't mean escape. It didn't mean hiding or running or hoping that somehow everything would work out. Survival meant fighting, meant using every advantage they had, including the one thing that terrified both their peoples, the child, their impossible, powerful, world-breaking child. Turn around, Elindra said to Mara. What? Turn. Around. Her voice carried a weight it had never held before, an authority that came from somewhere primal and fierce. We're not running to the neutral sanctum. We're going to end this. Mara stared at her like she'd gone insane. End what? You heard the lore keeper. Both armies are coming for you. How exactly do you plan to stop two nations from going to war? By giving them something more terrifying than war. Elindra felt the baby's heartbeat quicken in response to her emotions, felt its tiny, developing consciousness brush against hers through the bond. Already aware, already listening, already growing stronger than it should be. I'm going to show them exactly what their precious purity laws and fury rights have been hiding. I'm going to show them what their children could be if they weren't so busy destroying everything that doesn't fit their perfect little systems. She looked back toward the sanctum, toward where Gormath was struggling to his feet despite wounds that should have killed him 3 times over. Toward her father, who'd chosen politics over love so many times he'd forgotten what love even looked like. And if they still want war after that, then I'll give them something worth fighting for. Not territory, or pride, or ancient grudges, but the future. Our future. Mara was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled the horse to a stop and turned it around. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the most insane. Haven't decided which yet. Maybe both, Elindra admitted. Through the bond, she felt Gormath's awareness sharpening, felt him understanding what she intended. Felt his absolute, unshakable support despite the fear coursing through both of them. The other humans followed Mara's lead, turning their horses back toward the city that had just tried to execute them. Above the sanctum, smoke was rising from the shattered trial chamber. And on the horizon, visible now in the fading light, 2 armies were approaching, one from the east, bearing the silver banners of the Eternal Council. One from the west, carrying the blood-red standards of the United Orc clans. They had maybe 3 hours before those armies met in the valley outside the city. 3 hours to either prevent a war or start one that would consume the entire continent. Elindra pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling that third heartbeat growing stronger with each passing moment. "Hold on, little one," she whispered. "Things are about to get very, very complicated." As if in response, she felt a tiny pulse of power from inside her. Not quite magic yet, but the promise of it. The potential for something that could reshape everything. She just had to survive long enough to let it happen. The horses galloped back toward the city, toward chaos and judgment and 2 armies that wanted her dead. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Elindra wasn't afraid. She was furious. They found Gormath in the ruins of what had been a healing ward on the Sanctum's east wing, surrounded by bodies of guards who'd tried to recapture him after he'd dragged himself out of the trial chamber. He was on his knees, one hand pressed against a deep wound in his side that was bleeding faster than his body could compensate for, the other gripping a broken spear he'd taken from one of the fallen guards. When he saw Elindra, his face went through a dozen emotions in the space of a heartbeat. Relief, joy, terror, anger. "You came back," he said, and it came out like an accusation. "You were supposed to run, to get somewhere safe." Elindra slid off the horse before Mara could stop her, stumbling across the blood-slicked stones to reach him. Her hands found his face, his shoulders, checking for injuries through both touch and their shared bond. 3 broken ribs, punctured lung, deep lacerations across his back where someone had tried to flay him, burns from magical restraints, internal bleeding. He should be dead, would be dead, if not for the life force she'd poured into him and the stubborn, impossible resilience that seemed built into his very bones. "Safe doesn't exist anymore," she said, her healing magic already flowing through her fingertips into his wounds. "Not for us, not for anyone. So we're going to do something monumentally stupid instead. More stupid than binding our souls together." Despite everything, there was a hint of dark humor in his voice. "Much more stupid." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "We're going to stop a war." Gormath laughed, then immediately regretted it as the movement pulled at his broken ribs. "Just the 2 of us against both our armies? Those are terrible odds, little star." The nickname made her heart clench. "You've been listening to my thoughts again." Hard not to when you broadcast them that loudly. He reached up to touch her face with his free hand, his thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Your father called you that, before he ordered them to gut me slowly." "I know. I heard." She pressed her forehead against his, breathing in the scent of blood and smoke and something uniquely him. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry Don't apologize for him. You're nothing like him." Gormath's voice went rough. "You came back. He told you to run, told you to save yourself, and you came back anyway. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious?" Mara cleared her throat from behind them. "This is very touching, really. But those armies I mentioned, they're about 2 hours away now. If you've got a plan that doesn't involve us all dying horribly, I'd love to hear it." Elindra stood, pulling Gormath up with her. He swayed but stayed upright, his hand finding hers and gripping tight. "The plan is simple. We meet both armies in the valley. We show them what we are, what our child will be, and we make them choose." "Choose what?" one of the other humans asked. "Between peace and extinction," Elindra said quietly. "Because if they go to war over us, over children like ours, they're not just fighting each other. They're fighting the future, and the future will win eventually. It always does." She felt the baby pulse in response to her words, that tiny consciousness growing more aware with each passing moment. It was impossible. The pregnancy was barely 2 days old. There shouldn't be anything resembling awareness yet. Shouldn't be this sense of presence and power. But then again, nothing about this child followed normal rules. Lorekeeper Chakra appeared from the shadows near the ward entrance, and Alindra wondered how long she'd been standing there. "You understand what you're proposing," the old orc said. It wasn't a question. "You're going to expose yourself, expose the child, to both armies at once. They'll try to kill you on sight." "Maybe," Alindra acknowledged. "Or maybe they'll hesitate, wonder, question everything they've been taught." She looked at Chakra with sudden intensity. "You said there were others like us during the Sundering Wars, children born of tethered pairs. What happened to them? The real story, not the sanitized version." Chakra's scarred face grew distant. "I was young then, barely 40 years old, but I remember one of them. A boy named Kale, born to an elven mother and orcish father who'd bound themselves during a siege. The child was 3 years old when I saw him. He could hear thoughts, could feel emotions from anyone within 100 feet. Could heal wounds with a touch, but also cause pain if threatened. And once, when soldiers from both armies came for his parents, he screamed." The old orc's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The scream created a shockwave that knocked everyone within a quarter-mile unconscious. Elves, orcs, humans, animals, everything. When we woke up 3 hours later, the child and his parents were gone. We never found them. But the valley where it happened? Chakra's eyes met Alindra's. Nothing has grown there in 700 years. The ground itself remembers what that child did. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mara and her humans looked like they were reconsidering every decision that had led them to this moment. Even Gormath had gone pale, and Alindra felt his fear bleeding through their bond. Not fear of death, but fear of what their child might become, what it might be capable of. Alindra pressed a hand to her stomach. "Our baby isn't a weapon," she said firmly. "What Kyle did, he did because he was 3 years old and terrified and had no control. Our child will be different. We'll teach them, guide them, help them understand their power instead of fearing it. Assuming you live long enough to do any teaching." Sarandor's voice cut through the ward like a blade. He stood in the entrance with a dozen council guards behind him, all with weapons drawn. But he came alone toward them, his sword sheathed, his face unreadable. "I should arrest you both. Should kill the orc where he stands and drag you back to your father. That's my duty." "But you're not going to," Alindra said, reading the conflict in his eyes. "Why not?" Sarandor was quiet for a long moment. "Because I've spent the last hour listening to your father and the council plan how to dissect you. How to cut that child out of your body while you're still alive so they can study it. Study what makes it possible, what makes it wrong." His jaw clenched. "And I realized that I've been serving monsters, that we all have. That everything we call law and order and tradition is just a prettier name for fear and control." He pulled something from his belt. A small crystal vial filled with shimmering liquid. "This is condensed starstone essence. It'll suppress magic in a 50-foot radius for exactly 10 minutes. Long enough for you to get to the valley and position yourself between both armies before anyone can attack you directly." Gormath stepped forward. "Why would you help us? I killed your soldiers. Alindra chose me over you. What do you gain from this?" "Redemption, maybe. Or just the satisfaction of knowing I did one good thing before this whole rotten system collapses." Sarandor held out the vial. 10 minutes. That's all I can give you. Make them count." Alindra took the vial, their fingers brushing for just a moment. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You're still probably going to die." He stepped back, looking at his guards. "No one follows them. That's an order from your captain. Anyone who disobeys will answer to me personally." The guards shifted uncomfortably, but didn't move to stop them as Alindra, Gormath, Mara, and the other humans made their way toward the horses. Chakra fell into step beside them. "I'm coming with you," the lore keeper said. "Someone needs to bear witness to whatever happens next. And someone needs to tell the story afterward, whether you survive or not." They rode through the city streets, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Citizens watched them pass with expressions ranging from horror to confusion to something that might have been hope. Word had spread fast about the trial, about the pregnancy, about the two armies approaching. Some people threw stones. Others stood silent. A few, mostly humans and half-elves who lived in the city's poorest quarters, raised their fists in support. The city gates stood open, abandoned by guards who'd either fled or joined one of the approaching armies. Beyond them, the valley stretched out like a vast amphitheater, its grass golden in the fading light. And on opposite sides, like mirror images of organized violence, the two armies waited. The Elven force was beautiful and terrible, all silver armor and flowing banners, their magical weapons glowing with contained power. Elindra could see her father at the front, mounted on a white horse, his council robes replaced with battle armor she'd never seen him wear. The Orcish army was rawer, louder, a mass of warriors in leather and bone and iron, their weapons crude but effective. At their head was a massive female orc covered in more ritual scars than chakra, wearing a crown made of the skulls of defeated enemies. The War Mother of the United Clans, Elindra realized, the one leader all orcs would follow without question. Both armies had war drummers. Both had horns raised, ready to signal the charge. Both were waiting for someone to make the first move. Elindra and Gormath rode to the center of the valley, to the exact point where the grass grew tallest, and the ground dipped slightly, creating a natural focal point. They dismounted together, their hands still linked, their hearts beating in perfect synchronization, along with the third, impossible heartbeat between them. "This is insane," Gormath murmured. "Completely insane." "I know." Elindra raised the vial Sarandor had given them. "Ready?" "Not even a little bit. Do it anyway." She shattered the vial against the ground, and the starstone essence exploded outward in a wave of silvery light, blanketing the valley in magical suppression. For exactly 10 minutes, no one would be able to use magic to attack them at range. For exactly 10 minutes, if either army wanted them dead, they'd have to come close enough to look them in the eyes first. Elindra took a deep breath and shouted into the silence. "I am Elindra Brightmantle, daughter of your High Counselor. This is Gormath, once of the Blood Moon clan. We are tethered, we are bound, and I carry his child." The words echoed across the valley. On both sides, the armies stirred like disturbed hornet nests. "You've taught us our entire lives that we're too different to coexist. That elves and orcs are natural enemies. That children between our peoples are impossible, unnatural, abominations." Elindra pressed a hand to her stomach. "This child proves you're all liars." The silence that followed Elindra's declaration was so complete, she could hear individual blades of grass rustling in the evening wind. Two armies, thousands of warriors combined, held their collective breath as her words sank in like stones dropped into still water. Then her father's voice shattered the quiet. "She's lying. Elven and Orcish biology are fundamentally incompatible. This is a desperate ploy to save herself from justice. Guards, seize them both." The Elven front line started to move forward, but something made them hesitate. Maybe it was the way Elindra stood, one hand pressed protectively over her stomach. Maybe it was the absolute certainty in her voice. Or maybe it was the way the air around her had begun to shimmer with a power that had nothing to do with her own magic. The baby's presence was growing stronger, responding to her fear and determination with a force that even non-mages could sense. "I'm not lying," Elindra called out, her voice carrying across the valley with unnatural clarity. "And you know I'm not, Father, because you felt it yourself when you came to my cell. That's why you wanted me to end the pregnancy. Not because it was impossible, but because it proved that everything you've built your career on is a fabrication." From the Orcish side, the War Mother's deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. "The elf speaks of a child. Gormath the deserter, you who fled the rite of sealed fury and shamed your clan. Is this truth?" Gormath stepped forward, and despite his wounds, despite the fact that he was facing an army that wanted him dead, he stood tall. "It's truth, War Mother Krasha. I carry a bond with this elf healer, a tethering of souls. And yes, she carries my child. A child that shouldn't exist according to everything we've been taught, which means everything we've been taught is wrong." Krasha dismounted from her war beast, a massive creature that was half wolf, half bear, all teeth and muscle. She walked toward them with the confidence of someone who'd killed 1,000 enemies and expected to kill 1,000 more. The elven army tensed, but she ignored them completely, her focus locked on Gormath and Elindra. When she was 20 feet away, still outside the range where the Starstone suppression would affect her most powerful abilities, she stopped. "You fled the right," she said to Gormath. "Refused to have your weakness burned away, your compassion sealed, and for this, you were marked for death. But you claim this decision led you to something greater. Prove it." "How?" Gormath asked. "How do I prove that keeping my soul intact was the right choice? Show me what this impossible child can do." Krasha's eyes gleamed with something between curiosity and hunger. "If it's truly as powerful as the old stories claim, if it can break the magic that binds both our peoples, then let it demonstrate. Let it give me a reason not to slaughter you where you stand, and take the child for our shamans to study." Elindra felt ice flood her veins. Through the bond, she felt Gormath's matching terror. The baby was barely 3 days along. It shouldn't even have a heartbeat yet, let alone the kind of power Krasha was demanding proof of. But then she felt it. A pulse of awareness from inside her, stronger than before. Not quite thoughts, but something close to them. Images. Emotions. The baby showing her what it could sense, what it understood. It felt the War Mother's curiosity. Felt her father's fear masquerading as anger. Felt the two armies balanced on a knife's edge between war and wonder. And underneath all of it, the baby felt the magic that controlled them. The rite of sealed fury that had twisted the orcs into weapons. The purity enchantments that kept elves isolated and afraid of anything different. "I can't make our child perform like a trained animal," Elindra said. But even as she spoke, she felt something building inside her. Power that wasn't hers, wasn't Gormath's, but belonged to the impossible life they'd created together. "But I can show you what it already understands, what it wants you to see." She reached out through the bond, not just to Gormath, but to the baby. Asked permission in a way that had no words, but was deeper than language. And the baby answered. Light exploded from Elindra's body, not the silver white of elven magic or the deep crimson of orcish power, but something in between. Gold and rose and colors that had no names, swirling around her like living aurora. Through the bond, she felt Gormath gasp as the same light erupted from his skin. They were glowing, both of them, connected by threads of radiance that pulsed in time with their shared heartbeats. And in the space between them, visible to everyone watching, a third light began to form. Small, fragile, but impossibly bright. The baby's presence, made manifest for all to see. Krasha took an involuntary step backward. On the elven side, Elindra heard her father shouting orders, but no one was moving. Everyone was transfixed by the three lights intertwined in the center of the valley, by the undeniable proof that something new had been born. Something that shouldn't exist, but did anyway. "Look closer," Elindra commanded, and her voice wasn't entirely her own anymore. The baby was speaking through her, using her words to convey truths it couldn't yet articulate. "Look at what your magic has done. Look at what you've hidden." The golden light pulsed, and suddenly, everyone within 100 yards could see what Elindra and Gormath saw through their bond, could feel it. Images flooded the valley. Memories ripped from the fabric of suppressed history. They saw the Sundering Wars, 700 years ago, saw elves and orcs fighting side by side against a common enemy, mages who wanted to control the entire continent. saw those same mages when the war was won, turning on their allies. Saw them create the rite of sealed fury to make orcs more controllable, more predictable. Saw them establish the purity laws to keep elves isolated, afraid to mix with other races and potentially dilute the mages' power base. And they saw the children. Dozens of them, born to tethered pairs during and after the war. Children with abilities that terrified the ruling mages because they couldn't be controlled, couldn't be sealed or suppressed or bent to anyone's will. Children who could break enchantments with a touch, who could see through lies, who could unite rather than divide. The vision showed what happened to those children. The hunting parties, the executions, the parents forced to watch as their babies were killed, then executed themselves. The systematic erasure of every record, every proof that such children had existed. And finally, the rewriting of history. The establishment of the lie that elves and orcs were too different to ever create life together. A lie that had lasted 7 centuries. When the visions faded, the valley was utterly silent. Elindra felt tears streaming down her face, felt Gormath shaking beside her as they both processed what their child had shown them, felt the baby's exhaustion as the light around them dimmed. On the orcish side, warriors were dropping their weapons. Some were on their knees, others standing frozen in shock. The rite of sealed fury required absolute faith in orcish tradition, in the necessity of violence and strength. What they just witnessed shattered that faith like glass. The Elven army was fracturing. Soldiers arguing with their commanders, some trying to advance, others refusing. Elindra's father was screaming orders, but his voice had lost its authority. How could it not, when everyone had just seen proof that his entire worldview was built on genocide and lies? Krasha was the first to speak. "The old stories," she said, her voice hollow. "They were true. The children of mixed bonds, the cleansing, all of it. We've been living inside a cage built by corpses and calling it tradition." She looked at her warriors, then back at Elindra and Gormath. "I came here to wage war, to kill you both and take the child for study. But I can't do that. Not after seeing what I've seen, not after understanding what the right truly is." She raised her voice so the entire orcish army could hear. "The sealed fury is a chain. We've been slaves pretending to be warriors, and these two have shown us the key to our freedom." On the Elven side, something was happening. Soldiers were breaking formation, some moving toward Elindra, others backing away. Her father was trying to restore order, but several of the council members who'd accompanied the army were arguing with him, their voices carrying across the valley in sharp fragments. "Liar. Murderer. You knew. How many children did you help kill?" Sarandor appeared at her father's side, and even from a distance, Elindra could see him removing his captain's insignia and dropping it at Theron's feet. The message was clear. The High Counselor's authority was crumbling. But not everyone was convinced. From the Elven ranks, a war mage stepped forward, her hands already glowing with combat magic that was finally shaking off the Starstone suppression. "This is a trick. Orcish illusion magic combined with Elven manipulation. None of what we saw was real. The child is an abomination that must be destroyed before it contaminates our bloodlines further." She raised her hands, power building between them. "For the purity of the eternal light." The blast of energy she unleashed would have vaporized Elindra and Gormath both, would have ended everything in an instant, but it never reached them. The baby's light flared again, and this time it wasn't showing visions. It was protecting its parents. The War Mage's attack hit an invisible barrier and simply stopped. Hung in the air for a heartbeat, all that deadly power suspended in space. Then it reversed, flowing backward into the mage herself. She had time to scream once before her own magic consumed her from the inside out, turning her to ash in seconds. The message was unmistakable. The child could defend itself, could defend them, and anyone who tried to harm them would face consequences that no armor or magic could prevent. Elindra felt the baby's presence recede, exhausted from the effort. Through the bond, she felt Gormath's arms wrap around her as her knees buckled, felt his whisper against her ear. "It's okay. We're okay. You did it." But she hadn't done anything. The baby had. Their 3-day-old child had just killed someone to protect them, and that knowledge was almost as terrifying as it was relieving. Krasha moved closer, cautious now, respectful in a way she hadn't been before. "What do you want from us?" she asked. "You've shown us the truth. You've proven your child's power. What happens now?" Alindra looked up at her, then at the 2 armies watching. At her father, who looked like he'd aged 100 years in the past hour. At Serendor, who nodded once in what might have been approval or goodbye. At all the faces, Elven and Orcish and human, waiting for her to give them direction. "I want you to go home," she said simply. "Both armies. Go home. Stop fighting. Stop killing each other over lies and ancient grudges. And start asking questions about everything you've been taught. Start demanding truth instead of tradition." She took a shaking breath. "And leave us alone. Let us raise our child in peace. Let them grow up in a world that's better than the one we inherited. That's all I want." Krasha bowed her head. "You have my oath, Alindra of the Tethered Souls. The Orcish clans will not pursue you. We have enough enemies now among ourselves. Those who will cling to the old ways. We don't need to create new ones." She turned to her army and roared. "We return to the homeland. Any warrior who wishes to challenge the right of sealed fury, who wishes to reclaim their stolen soul, you march with me. The rest can rot in their chains." More than half the Orcish army followed her as she walked away from the valley. The others stood confused, angry, their worldview shattered, but their conditioning still holding them rigid. They would be dangerous, Alindra realized. Wounded animals clinging to what they knew. But they were no longer unified. On the Elven side, chaos had fully erupted. Her father was being escorted away by guards. Whether to protect him or arrest him, Alindra couldn't tell. The council members were shouting at each other. And the army was fracturing into a dozen different factions, all arguing about what to do next. Serendor walked toward her across the valley. When he reached them, he knelt. "I'm sorry. For everything. For not questioning sooner. For serving a system built on atrocity. For loving you in a way that tried to make you smaller instead of celebrating everything you are." He looked up, and there were tears on his face. "I can't undo any of it, but I can make sure you get somewhere safe before the ones who still believe in the old ways regroup and come for you." He stood, pulled out a map, and marked a location. 3 days north, the neutral sanctum, like Chakra said. "They'll shelter you there. I'll make sure no one follows." Alindra took the map, then impulsively hugged him. "Thank you. For choosing to see the truth. Thank you for showing it to me." He stepped back, looked at Gormath, and extended his hand. "Protect her. Protect them both. Or I'll find a way to come back from death itself to haunt you." Gormath clasped his forearm in the warrior's grip. "I intend to." As Serendor walked away, Alindra felt the baby stir again. Not with power this time, but with something simpler. Contentment. As if it knew somehow that the worst was over, that they'd survived. She looked at Gormath, this impossible man who'd given up everything for a chance at keeping his soul intact, who'd bound himself to her and created a life that would change the world. 3 days to the sanctum, she said. "Think we can make it?" He smiled, and despite the exhaustion and pain and uncertainty ahead, it was genuine. "With you, I can make it anywhere." The neutral sanctum was not what Alindra had expected. She'd imagined something grand, a fortress of stone and magic that announced its importance to the world. Instead, it was a collection of simple wooden buildings nestled in a valley so remote that even the maps Serendor had given them barely showed its location. It took them 4 days to reach it, not 3. The extra day came from Elindra collapsing on the second night, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion of carrying a child that was growing far too fast. When she woke, Gormeth was holding her against his chest, his heartbeat steady and strong through their bond, and she could feel the baby's presence wrapping around both of them like a protective blanket. They arrived at dawn on the 5th day, and the woman who met them at the sanctum's gates looked impossibly old. Her skin was weathered like ancient leather, marked with scars from all 3 major races, elf and orc and human. Her eyes were milky white with cataracts, but somehow Elindra knew she could see perfectly. Elindra Bright Mantle and Gormath of no clan, the woman said, her voice like wind through dried leaves. We've been expecting you. Or rather, we've been expecting what you carry. She led them through the quiet compound, past buildings where Elindra glimpsed other refugees, people of mixed heritage or forbidden bonds who'd found sanctuary here. A human woman with elven features held the hand of a child who looked fully orc. An elderly dwarf sat beside a young elf, both reading from the same book. A half-orc teenager practiced sword forms under the watchful eye of a human instructor. This was what the world could be, Elindra realized, what it should have been all along. I am Mother Elisara, the old woman said, as she guided them to a small cottage at the compound's edge. I've run this sanctum for 93 years, since the last mother passed and left me this burden. In that time, I've sheltered exactly 7 tethered pairs. You're the 8th. She paused at the cottage door. You're also the first who've managed to conceive, the first in 700 years. Inside, the cottage was simple but comfortable. A large bed, a fireplace, a table with fresh food already prepared, and in the corner, something that made Elindra's throat tighten. A cradle, hand-carved from wood that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. How long do we have? Gormath asked, and Elindra heard the exhaustion in his voice. Before they come for us. Before the ones who still believe in the old ways track us here. Mother Elisara was quiet for a long moment. The sanctum has protections. Ancient magic, older than the Sundering Wars, woven by mages who believed all life was sacred. No one can enter here with violence in their heart. The magic won't allow it. But, she held up a weathered hand, those protections don't extend beyond our borders. And there are already hunters gathering, elven purists who see your child as an abomination, orcish traditionalists who view it as a threat to their way of life, even some humans who fear what it represents. She moved to the window, looking out over the valley. You have perhaps 3 months before they organize enough to lay siege to this place. 3 months to prepare for what comes next. What comes next? Elindra asked, though part of her already knew the answer. You give birth. You raise your child as long as you can. And when the time comes, you make the hardest choice any parent can face. Mother Elisara turned back to them, and there was infinite sorrow in her blind eyes. You decide whether to fight for a world that doesn't want you, or to ensure your child survives even if you don't. The weight of those words settled over the cottage like a heavy blanket. Gormath's hand found Elindra's, their fingers intertwining as they'd done 1,000 times in the past week. Through their bond, she felt his determination mixing with fear, his love for her, and for their unborn child burning so bright, it made her chest ache. We'll fight, Gormath said. We didn't come this far to give up now. Everyone says that at first, Mother Elisara replied gently. Then they hold their child for the first time and realize that fighting might not be the answer, that sometimes survival means sacrifice. She moved toward the door. Rest now, eat. The pregnancy will accelerate even more in the coming weeks. Your body is trying to bring the child to term as quickly as possible, as if it knows time is running out. You'll need your strength for what's ahead. After she left, Elindra and Gormath stood in silence for a long moment. Then Elindra crossed to the cradle, running her fingers over the luminous wood. I'm scared, she admitted. Of giving birth, of what comes after, of not being enough. Gormath came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his hands settling over where their child was growing. You're terrified. I can feel it through the bond. But you're also the bravest person I've ever met. You stood between two armies and showed them the truth. You're enough, little star. You've always been enough. She leaned back against him, drawing strength from his presence. What if Mother Elisara is right? What if fighting isn't the answer? What if the only way to protect our child is to... She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't voice the possibility that they might have to give up their baby to keep it safe. Then we'll face that choice when it comes, Gormath said firmly. But not before. Right now we focus on staying alive, on bringing this impossible life into the world. Everything else, we handle as it happens. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. Elindra's body transformed with alarming speed. By the end of the first week, she looked 3 months pregnant. By the end of the second, 6 months. The baby was growing so fast that even Mother Elisara seemed concerned, consulting ancient texts and muttering about accelerated gestation in children of power. But through it all, the baby remained healthy. More than healthy. Elindra could feel its consciousness growing stronger each day, could sense it learning from everything it experienced through their bond. It knew Gormath's voice, would respond to his touch on her belly with little pulses of warmth. It could sense emotions from everyone in the sanctum, seemed to drink in their stories and struggles like a sponge absorbing water. And sometimes, late at night, Elindra would feel it reaching out through the bond with something that felt like questions. Not words yet, but the intent behind them. Who am I? Why do they fear me? What am I supposed to become? She didn't have answers. How could she, when she was still figuring out those questions herself? On the 20th day, Elindra went into labor. It was too early, even with the accelerated pregnancy. She should have had more time. But the baby had its own schedule, and it had decided the moment had come. The pain was unlike anything she'd prepared for. Each contraction felt like being torn apart and reassembled. Her body struggling to bring forth a life that was too powerful, too impossible to be born through normal means. Gormath stayed beside her through all of it, his presence through their bond the only thing keeping her grounded. Mother Elisara and 2 other healers worked with quiet efficiency, their magic supporting Elindra's failing strength. And through the agony, through the moments when she was certain she couldn't survive this, Elindra felt the baby's consciousness surrounding her, comforting her, telling her in ways that transcended language that everything would be all right. After 14 hours that felt like 14 years, the baby finally came. The silence that followed was terrifying. Newborns were supposed to cry, to announce their arrival with lusty screams. But their child made no sound. Elindra felt panic surge through her, felt Gormath's matching terror. Then Mother Elisara held up the baby, and Elindra understood why it hadn't cried. It was watching. Their daughter, because it was definitely a girl, had her eyes open and was studying the world with an intensity no newborn should possess. Her skin was a perfect blend of Elindra's pale complexion and Gormath's gray-green, creating a tone like moonlight on moss. Her eyes were gold, not the brown gold of orcs or the silver gold of elves, but pure molten amber. And when Mother Elisara placed her on Elindra's chest, the baby reached up with a tiny hand and touched her mother's face with such deliberate gentleness that everyone in the room caught their breath. "Hello, little one," Elindra whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We've been waiting for you." The baby made a sound then, not a cry, but something closer to a coo, and Elindra felt a wave of pure love wash through their bond. Love from the baby, offered freely and without reservation to both her parents. Gormath leaned in, his massive hand covering their daughter's entire back, and made a sound Elindra had never heard from him before. A sob of pure joy. "What will you name her?" Mother Elisara asked softly. Elindra and Gormath looked at each other, having had this conversation a dozen times over the past weeks. They'd considered names from both cultures, had debated the implications of choosing one heritage over the other, but in the end, there was only one name that felt right. Kelara, Elindra said. After the child from the old stories, the one who survived when all the others were killed. We're naming her after hope. Mother Elisara's blind eyes filled with tears. It's a good name. A strong name. May she live up to it. The peaceful moment lasted exactly 3 more hours, just long enough for Elindra to feed their daughter for the first time, to marvel at how she seemed to understand everything happening around her. Just long enough for Gormath to hold Kelara and sing her a lullaby in the Orcish tongue, his rough voice surprisingly gentle. Just long enough for them to believe, for a few precious moments, that maybe everything would be all right. Then the warning bells started ringing. The hunters had arrived. Not in 3 months as Mother Elisara had predicted, but now. Somehow, they'd tracked them faster than should have been possible. Through the cottage window, Elindra could see them gathering at the sanctum's borders. Elven warriors in silver armor, Orcish berserkers painted for war, and at their head, a figure she recognized even at this distance. Her father. Lord Theron Brightmantle had come himself, leading a coalition of the 2 peoples who agreed on nothing except that Kelara needed to die. Mother Elisara burst into the cottage, her usual calm shattered. The protections are holding, but they won't last forever. That many people focusing that much hatred and fear, it's eroding the ancient magic faster than I've ever seen. We have maybe 2 days before they can break through. She looked at Kelara, and something ancient and sad crossed her face. The child is remarkable. More than I dared hope. But that's exactly why they'll never stop hunting her. Never stop trying to kill her or capture her or corrupt her into a weapon. Elindra held Kelara closer, feeling their daughter's awareness spike with fear as she sensed the danger. What do we do? What every tethered pair before you has had to consider. Mother Elisara pulled out a small crystal pendant, its interior swirling with colors that made Elindra's eyes hurt to look at directly. This is a severance stone. It can break the tethering between you, end the bond that ties your lives together. Gormath went rigid. Why would we want that? Because right now, if either of you dies, all 3 of you die. The baby is connected to your bond. But if you break it, if you sever the tethering, Kelara survives even if you don't. It gives her a chance. The implications crashed over Elindra like a wave. You want us to break our bond, so we can sacrifice ourselves to save her. I want you to have options. Mother Elisara corrected gently. The severance is not a decision to be made lightly, but it is a decision that may need to be made. Soon. She placed the crystal on the table. I'll give you privacy to discuss it. But Elindra, Gormath, understand this. Those people outside, they're not going to stop. They're not going to negotiate. They see your daughter as an existential threat to everything they believe. And they're right to be afraid, because she is. She's going to reshape this world whether they want her to or not. Mother Elisara paused at the door. The question you need to answer is whether you'll be alive to guide her when she does, or whether you'll trust that she's strong enough to find her own way. After she left, Elindra and Gormath sat in silence, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, unaware of the impossible choice her parents now faced. Outside, the army of hunters grew larger, and the clock on their borrowed time continued its relentless countdown toward a decision that would change everything. Elindra looked at Gormath, then at Kelara, then at the severance stone glinting on the table. And for the first time since this all began, she had absolutely no idea what came next. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on, but knowing when to let go. Elindra and Gormath faced an impossible choice that no parent should ever have to make: stay together and risk losing everything, or break the bond that defined them to give their daughter a chance at survival. What would you have done? Would you sacrifice your own connection, your own life, to protect a child who represents hope for a broken world? Would you have the courage to stand between two armies and speak a truth that everyone wants buried? Their story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the systems we accept without questioning, the prejudices we inherit without examining, and the price we're willing to pay for a future that looks different from our past. Love, real love, isn't about grand gestures or perfect endings. It's about choosing someone again and again, even when the whole world tells you that choice is wrong. It's about creating life in the face of death, hope in the midst of hatred, and light where others see only darkness. Elindra and Gormeth didn't set out to change the world. They simply refused to let fear dictate who they were allowed to love. And in that refusal, they proved that the most dangerous thing to a system built on lies is a single, undeniable truth. If this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or question, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to follow more stories that challenge what we think we know about love, sacrifice, and the courage it takes to choose compassion over conformity. And leave a comment telling us, what would you have done in their place? Your answer might surprise you.